February in Antarctica. A cargo ship breaks through the ice into McMurdo Sound carrying containers of flour, canned vegetables, and powdered milk. Behind it, a C-17 transport plane lands on the ice runway with insulated boxes marked "Keep Warm." Inside those boxes, lettuce, strawberries, fresh apples. The lettuce has heating pads strapped to it because the cargo hold reached -50 Celsius during the flight from New Zealand. If one heater failed, the produce arrives as shattered blocks of frozen green ice.
We are in the McMurdo Station's freezer.
This is how food reaches the bottom of the world. And once it arrives, chefs face a countdown. Fresh greens last 7 days. Root vegetables might survive a month. After that, the kitchen runs on what can be frozen, canned, or powdered for the next 10 months until the ship returns.
Chef's job is to cook for between 20 and 120 people every day.
Antarctic base cooks don't just prepare meals. They manage a supply chain with no resupply option, fight against air drier than the Sahara, and serve food that becomes the only clock people have when the sun doesn't set for months or doesn't rise at all. The dining hall isn't just where people eat, it's where they measure time, maintain sanity, and remember what it feels like to taste something that wasn't shipped in a can. At the coldest place on Earth, cooking is part logistics, part creativity, and part survival. The supply chain begins thousands of miles away. Port Hueneme, California, ships pallets of food across the Pacific to Christchurch, New Zealand. From there, everything Antarctic-bound stages through a logistics hub before the final push south. The cargo vessel that makes the journey to McMurdo Sound carries the entire year's worth of dry goods, frozen supplies, and shelf-stable food. Operation Deep Freeze, the U.S. military and scientific logistics backbone, coordinates every container, every flight, every ton of supplies that reaches the continent. Once a year, usually in January or February, that cargo vessel breaks through sea ice into McMurdo Sound. The ship physically pushes through the frozen ocean, clearing a path to the station's dock. Offload operations run around the clock. Workers in insulated gear move pallets in shifts, their breath condensing in thick clouds even in the relative warmth of the Antarctic summer. Containers stack on the ice before being transported to warehouses. The scale is industrial, hundreds of tons of food moving through a supply chain with no room for error. What the ship delivers isn't just food, it's 12 months of sustenance with zero margin for mistake. If the logistics team forgets to order vanilla extract in October for this ship, the station goes without vanilla extract for 365 days. There is no correction window, no emergency resupply. The order placed nearly a year in advance becomes the locked menu. Damage or loss during transit can't be replaced. If a pallet of flour gets contaminated by seawater during the journey, that flour is gone. The kitchen adjusts or does without. The ship delivers industrial volumes. Number 10, cans of green beans, potatoes, and tomato sauce. 50-pound bags of flour, drums of powdered milk, pallets of frozen meat wrapped and labeled for a year of storage. McMurdo's kitchen prepares 3,000 meals a day during summer when the population reaches 1,000 people. The ship's cargo must support that volume with zero buffer. McMurdo also functions as a supply hub. Smaller aircraft ferry goods from McMurdo to the South Pole Station and to field camps scattered across the continent. If McMurdo runs short, everyone downstream suffers. Storage presents its own challenge. The outdoor temperature at McMurdo reaches -60 Fahrenheit. That's too cold. Meat stored in those conditions suffers extreme texture damage. Plastic containers shatter. The station maintains freezers at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, standard commercial freezer temperature, specifically to protect frozen food from the -60-degree environment outside, which is colder than any freezer designed for food preservation. The infrastructure inverts normal logic. You must protect frozen food from the cold. Following the ship, C-17 aircraft bring what the kitchen staff calls freshies, fresh produce. These flights only run during the Antarctic summer, October through February, staging out of Christchurch. The cargo holds on these planes are unheated. At altitude, temperatures inside drop to -50 Celsius. Transporting lettuce to Antarctica becomes harder than transporting ice cream because lettuce cannot freeze. Each box of fresh produce gets packed in insulated tri-wall containers with active heating pads. The system works until it doesn't. A single heater failure turns a crate of spinach into a solid green block. useless on arrival. The freshies that survive the flight trigger an immediate response in the galley. Chefs know the clock starts the moment those boxes open. Leafy greens and berries have the shortest lifespan. 1 week, maybe less. The salad bar at McMurdo becomes the center of the dining hall. People eat fresh vegetables at breakfast, lunch, and dinner because everyone knows the window is closing. A chef described it as a salad frenzy, the brief period when the menu can offer something crisp and green before it's gone. Berries disappear first. Bananas follow, often arriving already spotted and soft. Within a week, the leafy greens wilt beyond use. What remains are the hardier items. Root vegetables, thick-skinned fruits like oranges and apples. These buy another 3 weeks if stored carefully. Eggs, if they've been treated with mineral oil, can last months, but they're rationed. By the end of the first month, fresh produce is finished. The kitchen transitions to what will sustain it for the rest of the year: frozen, canned, and powdered ingredients. The salad bar closes. The menu shifts to what can be reconstituted or reheated. Chefs describe the change as moving from variety to endurance. The challenge becomes making meals that don't taste like the same meal repeated with minor adjustments. People miss texture more than taste. In a diet that turns increasingly soft and uniform, the sensory experience of food begins to flatten. 2 months after the freshies run out, the kitchen relies entirely on shelf-stable supplies. 3 ingredients form the backbone of nearly every meal: powdered milk, liquid eggs, and number 10 cans. Powdered milk arrives in industrial quantities. Liquid milk is too heavy and too perishable to justify the cargo space. Chefs use powdered milk for baking and cooking, and they reconstitute it for drinking. The reconstituted version has a cooked taste that people notice immediately. To mask it, the kitchen serves it flavored, chocolate or vanilla, which hides the off notes enough to make it drinkable. Liquid eggs come in frozen cartons. Shell eggs are a luxury item, sometimes coated in mineral oil to extend their lifespan for months. But the daily scramble comes from pasteurized egg product poured from cartons. Chefs add cheese, hot sauce, or dehydrated onions to mask the processed texture. The goal is to make people forget they're not eating real eggs. Number 10 cans, industrial-sized tins holding roughly a gallon of contents, become the foundation of every meal. Canned vegetables, canned sauces, canned meats. The menu runs on a 4 to 6 week cycle. Chefs rotate dishes to create the illusion of variety, but the base ingredients remain the same. Canned green beans appear in different preparations, sautéed 1 week, in a casserole the next, as a side with altered seasoning the week after. The goal is to prevent what staff call menu fatigue, the point where people stop caring what's served because it all tastes like a minor variation of the previous meal. The pantry environment itself creates problems. Indoor humidity at the station drops near 0%. Flour becomes statically charged and difficult to weigh. It clings to surfaces, to containers, to anything it touches. Crackers and dehydrated goods last indefinitely in the dry air, but working with ingredients that behave differently than they would at sea level requires constant adjustment. At McMurdo, the soft-serve ice cream machine is referred to as the station's emotional anchor. When it breaks, staff report a noticeable shift in mood. The machine represents consistency and a small indulgence. Without it, discontent spreads. Food becomes one of the only variables in an otherwise unchanging routine, and when that variable disappears or disappoints, the psychological impact registers immediately.
So the teamwork is very important, certainly when it comes to the kitchen.
Chefs respond with what they call Frankenstein food. Leftover prime rib from Sunday dinner becomes filling for Philly cheesesteaks on Tuesday. Stale bagels turn into bread pudding. The creativity isn't about gourmet presentation. It's about making people forget they're eating from the same limited pantry day after day. The work is repetitive but high stakes. Every plate sent out carries more weight than the food on it. At the South Pole, cooking doesn't follow normal rules. Amundsen Scott Station sits at 9,300 feet of physical elevation. But because the Earth spins and the atmosphere thins at the poles, the physiological altitude feels closer to 10,000 or 12,000 feet. The air pressure is lower than at equivalent elevations elsewhere. That difference changes how food cooks. Water boils at 190 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 212. That 22-degree gap sounds minor, but it breaks basic cooking processes. Pasta turns to mush before it cooks through because the water can't get hot enough to properly hydrate the starches. Dried beans remain hard bullets unless pressure cooked. Rice takes 30% longer. Coffee brews weak and sour because 190-degree water can't extract oils and flavors the way 212-degree water does. Baristas adjust grind size to compensate, but the results are never quite right. Baking becomes the hardest skill to master. Low air pressure makes yeast and baking powder gases expand violently and quickly. The dough rises too fast. Cakes shoot upward in the oven, then collapse into dense bricks before the structure sets. The cell walls burst before the heat can solidify them. What should be light and airy becomes heavy and gummy. Chefs learn to compensate. They reduce leavening agents, yeast and baking powder, by 20 to 30% to slow the rise. They increase the oven temperature to set the structure faster before it collapses. They add extra liquid to offset the rapid evaporation that happens in low pressure and low humidity. Baking stops being intuitive and becomes precision engineering. Recipes that work at sea level fail catastrophically at the pole. A baker who doesn't adjust will produce inedible results for weeks until they figure out the corrections. The dryness compounds every problem. Indoor humidity drops below 5%. That's drier than the Sahara Desert. Bread stales in minutes instead of days. Cookie dough dries out and crumbles before it reaches the oven. Chefs can't proof dough by covering it with a towel and leaving it on the counter. The surface skins over and cracks within minutes. They build proofing boxes with added steam just to keep the dough from dying before it rises. You can't make toast in a toaster. The bread dries so fast it turns into a hard rusk before it browns. Chefs pan-fry bread in butter to simulate the texture of toast because the toaster doesn't work. The air itself is hostile to moisture. Potato chips left open never go stale in the traditional sense. They stay crisp forever because there's no humidity to soften them. The dryness affects the cooks themselves. They dehydrate without feeling thirsty. The body's thirst response doesn't trigger until dehydration is already advanced. Chefs drink 3 to 4 liters of water per day on a forced schedule because if they wait until they feel thirsty, they already have a headache. The environment pulls moisture out of everything: food, air, people, and doesn't give it back. Canned food is universally soft. Vegetables lose structure during processing. Meats become tender to the point of falling apart. After months of eating from cans, the absence of texture becomes a noticeable deprivation. People don't just want food, they want to feel it resist when they bite down. At the South Pole's Amundsen Scott Station, a small hydroponic greenhouse grows lettuce, cucumbers, and fresh herbs. The chamber produces only a few kilograms per week for a population of 40 to 50 people during winter. A single fresh strawberry grown in the greenhouse is sometimes cut into 50 tiny slivers, so everyone at the station gets one piece. The taste matters less than the fact that it's fresh, that it wasn't shipped frozen or reconstituted from powder. The greenhouse operates under strict constraints. The Antarctic Treaty prohibits introducing soil to the continent. Any foreign organic material risks introducing invasive species to an ecosystem that has remained isolated for millions of years. Everything in the greenhouse grows in sterile water and rock wool, an inert growing medium that provides structure without biological content. The setup is entirely hydroponic, carefully monitored, and legally compliant. But the greenhouse serves another function beyond food production. It's the only place on the station that smells like life. The air inside is humid and earthy. Despite the artificial growing medium, the space feels alive in a way the rest of the station doesn't. Staff volunteer for greenhouse duty, not for the food, but to spend time near the plants, to remember what growing things smell like. In an environment of metal, ice, and processed air, the greenhouse provides a sensory reminder of the biological world. Texture becomes a marker of quality. Fresh apples are rationed and treated as premium items. The sound of biting into something crisp registers more strongly than flavor. One chef mentioned that people would trade desserts for a single stick of celery because the crunch provided something their diet otherwise lacked. The sensory experience of eating shifts from taste to texture when the former becomes predictably bland. At McMurdo, the 24-hour pizza station exists partly because pizza can provide textural variation, crispy crust, chewy cheese, varied toppings, from otherwise uniform ingredients. Shift workers at 3 in the morning rely on it as the only food option available when the main galley is closed. It's not gourmet, but it's reliable and varied enough to avoid the monotony trap. Chefs work within a fixed rotation, 4 to 6 weeks of meals repeated continuously until the next resupply. The cycle must balance caloric needs, available ingredients, and the psychological demand for variety. A poorly planned cycle leads to menu fatigue. A well-planned cycle keeps people engaged with food instead of viewing it as fuel to endure. The pressure falls on every individual meal. If Taco Tuesday disappoints 2 weeks in a row, the staff will stop looking forward to it. The problem compounds. People begin dreading the rotation instead of anticipating it. Morale doesn't collapse from a single bad meal, but from the realization that the bad meal will repeat predictably for months. Chefs mitigate this by treating leftovers as raw material. Sunday's roast becomes Monday's sandwiches. Stale bread turns into croutons or bread pudding. The goal is to break the perception of repetition even when the base ingredients remain identical. A chef at McMurdo described the job as making people forget they're eating the same chicken for the 3rd time this week. The menu also has to account for caloric variance. Staff working outdoors in extreme cold burn significantly more calories than those working inside. Field workers require 3,500 to 5,000 calories per day just to maintain body temperature and function. The kitchen must serve meals dense enough to support that output while not overfeeding the indoor staff, who tend to gain weight during the winter months, a phenomenon called the Winter 20. Field camps operate on a different scale entirely. 4 to 10 people live in tents pitched directly on the ice. The kitchen is a propane stove set up inside a Scott tent, a pyramid-shaped shelter designed for polar conditions. Even with the stove running, the interior temperature stays well below freezing. Cooking means working in insulated gloves, managing fuel carefully, and keeping everything that can freeze inside sleeping bags or coats. The field camp menu consists of frozen steaks stored in snow pits, sticks of butter, massive chocolate bars, and dehydrated mountain house meals. Pemmican blocks, concentrated mixtures of fat and protein, provide the caloric density needed for extreme cold. Field workers eat food that would seem absurd anywhere else. Butter consumed plain, chocolate bars the size of bricks, steaks so calorie-dense they're closer to fuel than cuisine. Tomorrow's steak goes inside the sleeping bag overnight or inside a coat during the day. Body heat thaws it faster and more fuel efficiently than the stove, which would take 4 hours. Fuel is rationed. Every propane canister must be flown in. Wasting fuel on thawing when body heat works is inefficient. Field cooking strips away every unnecessary step. The goal is calories and warmth, not presentation. Balancing these needs within a rotating menu that uses the same ingredients week after week requires constant adjustment. Portion sizes vary by role. High-calorie options exist alongside lighter meals. The system works only if chefs remain aware of who's eating and why they're eating. A logistical oversight, running out of a key ingredient early in the cycle, for example, can destabilize the entire operation. There's no resupply to fix the gap. The menu adapts or morale suffers. June 21st marks the winter solstice in Antarctica, the midpoint of months-long darkness. The sun will return eventually, but the station remains isolated. No planes have arrived since February, and none will until October. The midwinter dinner is the most important event of the Antarctic year. Planning begins weeks ahead as chefs review inventory and choose ingredients saved specifically for this night. Not everything survives 6 months of freezing equally well. Certain cuts of beef keep their texture, lobster tails hold quality, and flash frozen vegetables retain flavor. The chefs reserve the best of what remains and won't touch it for any other meal. The dinner is formal and multi-course. Beef Wellington made from the station's best beef, lobster tails with butter, truffle mashed potatoes built from powdered potatoes and truffle oil, and intricate desserts with spun sugar and careful plating. It's the opposite of the usual high-volume utilitarian cooking. The dining hall transforms. Blackout curtains hide the endless dark, fairy lights replace fluorescence, and tables get cloths instead of trays. Staff arrive in improvised formal wear, tuxedos, gowns, or anything close. Scientists trade thermal gear for bow ties. Plumbers and mechanics dress up from costume boxes. The absurdity is part of the charm, breaking monotony. During the meal, all Antarctic stations exchange formal greetings by radio and email. Vostok, Kunlun, Hawley, and others send solstice messages acknowledging the shared experience of isolation. It becomes a moment of collective recognition across the continent. The atmosphere is unique. People linger, talk longer, laugh more. Music and toasts fill the room. For a few hours, the station feels less like a remote research outpost and more like a place where people choose to gather. The food matters, but the ritual matters more. It creates a symbolic break in an otherwise unbroken winter. The dinner doesn't erase isolation, but it marks a milestone. Afterward, routine resumes, the darkness remains, and supplies are still frozen. But everyone knows they've crossed the deepest point of winter, and the second half has begun. Every meal in Antarctica produces waste, and none of it can remain on the continent. The Antarctic Treaty forbids leaving behind food scraps, packaging, or any organic material, so everything brought in must eventually be shipped out. The kitchen generates the most waste, making its management a daily, regulated task. Waste is separated into 17 categories. Food scraps, bones, and soft tissue are all divided because they process differently. Some stations incinerate soft organics or dehydrate them, but bones resist both methods. Cans are washed, delabeled, crushed, and baled. Plastics are sorted by type. Cardboard is compacted, and grease and oil are collected for retrograde transport. Everyone rotates through dish pit duty, known as gash. Scientists, doctors, administrators, mechanics. They scrape plates and sort waste piece by piece. A half-eaten chicken wing gets separated into bone, soft tissue, and rinsed sauce. Nothing is automated. Every item is handled manually with precision. The work is humbling, placing people who manage high-level scientific or operational tasks into the same essential chore. It reinforces the shared responsibility of keeping the station running. Wildlife protection is another driver. Any exposed food can attract skuas or seals, and feeding wildlife, even accidentally, is illegal. Human food disrupts natural behavior and violates international protections, so all waste must remain contained and controlled. At season's end, frozen food waste, baled cans, and sorted materials are loaded onto ships or planes bound for New Zealand or the United States. Waste follows the supply chain backward. What arrived as food leaves as processed refuse, keeping the continent unchanged. Antarctic-based chefs work in extreme conditions not because the pay is good or the recognition is high, but because the kitchen is the only place on the continent where normal life continues. Meals happen on schedule. Food provides structure. The dining hall marks time when the sun doesn't. The skills required extend beyond cooking, managing a logistics chain with no error margin, rationing fresh produce that decays on a fixed schedule, preparing thousands of meals from a pantry that can't be restocked for months, compensating for altitude and dryness that break normal recipes, balancing the caloric needs of field workers, burning 5,000 calories a day against the sedentary reality of indoor staff, sorting waste into 17 categories, and ensuring every scrap leaves the continent in compliance with the international treaty. The technical demands are significant, but what makes the job difficult is knowing that every meal carries psychological weight. A bad dinner doesn't just mean complaints, it means the loss of one of the few variables in an unchanging environment. A successful menu cycle doesn't just feed people, it gives them something to anticipate in a place where anticipation is rare. The annual cargo ship will return. The C-17 flights will bring fresh strawberries that last a week. The cycle will repeat. Until then, the chefs keep the galley running, the menu rotating, and the meals coming. In Antarctica, food isn't just fuel. It's the clock, the calendar, and the reminder that somewhere beyond the ice, normal life still exists.